For 6 nights before his family was murdered, the farmer heard footsteps above him in the dark. He climbed the ladder to the attic, holding a lantern. He searched it end to end. He found nothing. No one. Just the cold beams and the dust. But someone had been sleeping up there. And for weeks, in the snow around the farmhouse, there had been footprints that led out of the forest, across the field, and up to the door. There were no footprints leading back. Whoever had walked out of the Bavarian woods and up to Hinterkaifeck had never walked away again. The farm was called Hinterkaifeck, 70 kilometers north of Munich. A small farmstead at the edge of the woods, connected to the nearest village, Grobern, by a single dirt track. From the village, you could not see the farm. From the farm, you could not see the village. The house and the barn were built under one long, low Bavarian roof. The animals slept on one side. The family slept on the other. Between them, a single wooden door. 6 people lived there in the spring of 1922. Andreas Gruber, the farmer, 63 years old, hard-faced, disliked in the village. His wife, Cecilia, 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35. Victoria's 2 children, a 7-year-old girl, also called Cecilia, and a 2-year-old boy, Joseph. And, as of the afternoon of the last day of March, a 6th person had joined them. A new maid, Maria Baumgartner, 44, who had arrived from the nearby village of Kubach to take up work. By the time Maria set her suitcase down in the small room that would be hers, she had less than 12 hours to live. The Grubers were not well liked at Grobern. Andreas was known as cruel and quick-tempered. Villagers said he beat his wife. Villagers whispered other things too, because in 1915, Andreas Gruber and his own daughter Victoria had been convicted in a Bavarian court of an incestuous relationship spanning several years. He served 1 year in prison. She served 1 month. Victoria had married a man called Karl Gabriel in March of 1914. 3 months after the wedding, Karl was drafted into the Great War. 7 months after that, on the 12th of December, 1914, he was reported killed at the Battle of Arras in northern France. His body was never positively identified. The little boy, Joseph, the 2-year-old in the cot, was not Karl's son. Victoria had admitted, in 1919, to her lover, a neighbor called Lorenz Schlittenbauer, that the child had been fathered by her own father, Andreas, during a continuation of the abuse. Schlittenbauer reported this to the police. Then he withdrew the complaint. Then he restated it, under oath, at the trial. Andreas was released. Schlittenbauer, for his part, agreed to adopt the child. This was the family at Hinterkaifeck. The things began 6 months before the murders. The first maid, a young woman called Crescens Rieger, left the farm without notice. She told people in Grobern that she was leaving because Hinterkaifeck was haunted. She had heard footsteps at night, above the ceiling, where nothing living should have been walking. She had heard voices in empty rooms. No one in the village would take her place. Then, in March of 1922, the things began to happen to Andreas himself. First, there was the newspaper, a Munich paper, a few days old, that he found one morning on the kitchen table. He had not bought it. No one in the house had bought it. No one in the neighborhood subscribed to it. He asked the postman. The postman had not delivered it. No one could explain how it had come to be in the kitchen. Then there was the key to the house, which hung always on the same nail by the door. One morning, it was gone. It was never found. Then, in the last week of March, Andreas walked out into the snow around the farmhouse and saw something that he went straight to his neighbors to describe. A single line of footprints coming out of the forest, across the field, up to a back door of the farm, and no footprints leading back. That same night, the family heard the footsteps in the attic. Andreas climbed up. He searched. He found no one. He told 3 of his neighbors what he had found. He told them about the newspaper, and the key, and the tracks in the snow. They listened. They nodded. They went home. Nobody came to the farm. What happened at Hinterkaifeck on the evening of the 31st of March? We know only from what was found afterwards, in the barn and in the house. Sometime in the early hours of the night, something called the 4 older members of the family, one by one, from the house into the barn. We do not know what it was. A noise from the animals, a voice from outside, a cry for help. The investigators later concluded, quietly, that they could not explain how each member had been drawn out alone. They went, all 4 of them, in turn. Andreas first, or perhaps his wife, then Victoria, then the 7-year-old girl, Cecilia. Each one was killed at the door of the barn with a single heavy farm tool, a roytau, a mattock, a kind of iron pickaxe used to break frozen earth. Each one was struck across the head. Each one fell. Their bodies were dragged into a single heap in the corner of the barn and covered with a thin layer of straw. When the 4 in the barn were dead, the killer walked back into the house. In the bedroom, the little boy Joseph was in his cot. He was 2 years old. He was killed there where he lay. In the small room that had been given to her only that afternoon, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, was still in her bed. She was killed there. 6 people, 1 evening, 1 weapon. When the police physician performed the autopsies 4 days later in the barn, he noted a single detail that has sat at the center of this case for 100 years. The 7-year-old Cecilia, the granddaughter, had not died at once. She had been struck. She had fallen onto the straw beside her mother's body, and then she had lived. For hours, in the dark, beside the others. She had torn her own hair out in tufts before she died. After the murders, the killer did not leave. For at least 3 days, someone lived at Hinterkaifeck. The cattle were fed in their stalls. The animals did not cry from hunger as they should have. Meals were cooked in the kitchen. Bread was cut from the pantry and eaten. Meat was cut from the larder. The fireplace burned. The beds had been slept in. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney by neighbors who passed on the road. No one came to the farm. On the morning of Tuesday, the 4th of April, 4 days after the killings, a mechanic named Albert Hofner arrived at Hinterkaifeck to repair an engine. He waited for an hour. No one came out of the house to greet him. He repaired the engine anyway, working alone in the yard for 4.5 hours, while the 6 bodies lay inside the buildings around him. He never saw anyone. He packed up his tools. He left. Later that afternoon, 3 men from the village, Lorenz Schlittenbauer and 2 others, walked up to Hinterkaifeck because the 7-year-old Cecilia had been missing from school and because the family had not come to church on Sunday. The barn door was unlocked. They found the 4 bodies under the straw in the corner. They went into the house. They found little Joseph in his cot. They found Maria in her room. By the time the police arrived from Munich, several men from the village had already walked through every room. The evidence was trampled. Meals that had been cooked by the killer were still sitting, half-eaten, on the stove. The investigation had not yet begun, and the investigation was, in many ways, already over. 8 days after the bodies were found, the state of Bavaria offered a reward of 100,000 marks, an enormous sum in 1922, for information leading to the killer. No one ever claimed it. Over the following century, more than 100 suspects have been named in the Hinterkaifeck case. They suspected Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who had fathered a child with Victoria, The neighbor who had been first into the barn. The neighbor who had, strangely, moved the bodies without hesitation, and who had known where to look. They suspected Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, reported dead at Arras but never identified, returning from a war that had destroyed him to find that his wife had been pregnant by another man. They suspected the Gump brothers, the Bickler brothers, the Tollers, a traveling laborer, a returning soldier, a rejected lover, an escaped patient from a mental institution. None of it was ever proven. In 1925, the skulls of all 6 victims, which had been removed at autopsy and sent to Munich for further examination, were reported missing from their storage. They have not been seen since. The case was officially closed in 1955. The last interrogations were conducted in 1986. And then, in 2007, a team of students at the Bavarian Police Academy in Fürstenfeldbruck reopened the Hinterkaifeck file as a training exercise, applying a century of modern investigative technique to the surviving evidence. After months of work, they came to a single conclusion. They named the person they believed, on the balance of the evidence, to be the killer. They have never released the name. The person, they said, was by 2007 long dead. And to release the name, they said, would damage the lives of living people who had done nothing wrong. The case file is still open. The farmhouse at Hinterkaifeck was torn down in the summer of 1923, a little more than a year after the murders. The wood was burned. The stones were carted away. Nothing was left of the building at all, and nothing of the building was kept. During the demolition, the workmen going through the attic found something that had not been in the evidence. It was the mattock. It had been hidden in the roof of the barn, under the thatch. The iron blade was still dark with dried blood. The attic had been cleared by police, twice, in the weeks after the killings. Twice, they had walked through the space, and twice, they had failed to find it. Someone, in those weeks, had put it there. Today, at the edge of the woods where Hinterkaifeck once stood, there is a small stone shrine. 6 names are carved into it, 6 dates, and a single cross, for the family that was killed in one evening by a hand that was never named. The footprints in the snow were gone by the second week of April 1922. The footsteps in the attic stopped when the family stopped hearing them. And somewhere, in the 100 years that have passed since, the person who walked out of the Bavarian woods and up to the farmhouse and never walked back has died, unnamed, and taken the answer with them.